welcome to Jane, which Sandy will tell us more about shortly. Before we go on to the agenda, Karen, would you like to do some housekeeping, please?
Yes, please. Just a couple of points to note, just similar to last time. It's just to let you know the meeting will be recorded, and can you make sure that there's no personal information that can be visible in the background. But also quite important to note is that background noise picked up. It's really quite loud, so just be aware of that. If you've got any questions or points to be raised, can we ask you to use the button on the screen for the blue hand rather than waving at the screen. If any member leaves the meeting, please let me know. And I think that's possibly about the, oh sorry, there's one last thing. If any member manages to mute themselves and they have difficulty unmuting themselves, can you please just raise your blue hand and we'll get IT to unmute you. That's all from me, thanks.
Thank you. And it's easier if members have themselves unmuted throughout, and just be careful of the background noise. Okay, thank you. Apologies.
Chair, there's no apologies, but obviously as Gail has indicated that Charlie Sinclair is off long term, so I think I'll put his apologies in for this one.
Okay, I think that's fair. Okay, any declarations of interest?
I'll just need to leave at 1 o'clock to go off for an X-ray.
That's fine. Thanks, Graham. I had a note of that. If you just let us know when you're signing out, that would be helpful. Thanks. Any declarations of interest? Nope. That's good. Okay. Can we move on to agenda item 3, please? That's the minutes, including the action points. So A is the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any point that they wish to raise on that? Nope. The only point I wanted to bring up briefly was around oh, that's actually the action point, so we'll move on to that next. So can we approve the minutes? Yep, thank you. Okay, the action points. Any point there? Anything anyone wants to bring up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Peter.
Yeah, it was page 14. It's about induction, basically, and it was scheduled for October, and I was just wondering if that's still on track for given all the circumstances.
Okay, thanks. I just wondered, it links back to the minutes around the discussion about recruitment for the substantive post for Chief Officer, how we get that on an action plan somewhere, so that we don't lose, I know we won't lose sight of it, but it was just to track it. What's anyone's thinking on that? Would this action plan be appropriate, or do we just need to raise it at the IJB? Sandy?
Yeah, well, there's two points there. I think we can note that if it doesn't come up, the issue about a substantive appointment to the Chief Officer, if it doesn't come up at the IJB, we can, perhaps as an audit committee, just maybe make reference to that, and maybe make a communication, maybe through yourself, Julie, as a kind of an independent person. Just say we're interested in the progress of that, particularly as it's referenced in the external auditors report further on in the agenda.
Absolutely. We had raised it at the last meeting, just to be mindful of it. And I mean, it involves 2 posts really now. So I'm just concerned that people just don't have an infinite piece of string that they're working to really. Gail, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Julie, I can't see if my hand's up actually this morning. Was my hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really to respond to Peter's point about the induction. And yes, Peter, there is progress there. I did see sight of a draft programme last week. So yes, that should be concluded.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's anything else on action points from page 13? No, I'm not seeing any hands up. Obviously, we've got some reds there that I know will be causing concern to people, and I guess that there's a good rationale behind some slippage there. I think we all understand that, and I feel quite comfortable that they're visible enough in people's minds. Is that a fair reflection, Sandy?
Yep.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I couldn't get that to unmute. Yeah, sorry, Julie. Yeah, we know we've got some backdated actions. They appear on the action log here. They also appear on a couple of the reports further down. We'll see that again. That list is not particularly getting worse. It is the same things. One or two parts of that are just gradually getting chipped away. But you're absolutely right to say that there's some kind of long-standing actions. These do appear in our governance statement. We've tried to give them a profile in the IJB reports this afternoon. And I think we've had capacity issues, we've got complexity there, and I think we have to kind of bear in mind the likes of Gale have only been in post really since February, and obviously that's been a difficult time since then, and we need to just do what we can to pick away at these by ourselves or very often in conjunction with partners to deal with that.
Okay. People happy with that? Yes, good, I'm seeing nodding. Right, thank you very much. So,
sorry, it's Catherine here. I have
sorry, Catherine.
I just have to keep switching my video off because I've not got the best connection, so it doesn't seem to like to multitask. Just picking up on page 14, the action there about reviewing the breadth and role of the audit committee was just really to add weight to that. And I know that that's a piece of work ongoing, but I think it may become more relevant because I've had sight of suggestions around the clinical and care governance review from an NHS Tayside perspective, which means that we do need to consider how best we exercise that clinical and care governance issue locally. So it would be quite helpful to consider whether the audit committee has any role in that or not as part of that process. So I'm quite happy to be involved in those discussions.
Well, that's brilliant, thank you. And I think, I mean, at this point, let's remind ourselves we're still looking for another member of the audit committee, which we will hopefully get resolved in time for the next audit committee meeting, and may well mention that this afternoon actually for volunteers or well, volunteers arms up back scenario, but I'm really hopeful that we'll get somebody who's really interested in that. So fingers crossed, and thank you, Catherine, for that. So we'll note the action point and move on to agenda item number 4, which is by Tony Gaskin, our Chief Internal Auditor. Over to you, please, Tony. We're not hearing you yet.
No.
Nope. Nope, not got you.
Shall I maybe speak on Tony's behalf?
Okay.
Okay.
Daring. Tony,
Okay.
Tony, I wonder, do you want to go out and come back in again to see if that works? Or have you checked volume control?
Okay.
Okay.
While he's doing that, I'll just pick up. So this is a progress report. It's about the 1920 and touching on the start of 2021 activity. So we've seen this before. What we're kind of really reflecting here is that the 1920 programme is largely complete, which is helpful. Obviously, a big part of that was the reports we saw to the last audit committee, where we had the annual internal audit report. And what we also see is the start of the 2021 activity starting to come through now. Ironically, we've got a paper later on the agenda about the 2021 plan, so we'll come to that in due course. But I don't think there's any particular issues here. We knew as we were putting this report together that the data quality report was just getting across the line, and that's why we've added it on the agenda further down, and we can touch on that in more detail. But I don't think there's any other particular issues Tony would flag, so hopefully that's okay, Tony.
Nod. Yeah, we're not
He's
getting
now
any.
muted, but he's now just muted.
He's muted.
He's
Yeah.
on mute. Yeah, he's on mute. So he's maybe got
He
his.
said it was.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just need to.
Sorry, you'll have to remove one or else I'll get feedback will come.
Right, now, hopefully, whether you can see me or not, which is no great advantage, hopefully you can hear me now.
We've got you both.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's unfortunate, but here we go. So, yeah, there's nothing particularly I'd want to add, apart from we will, the last piece of work from back the data quality is on the agenda. We will be having discussions soon, particularly around the timing of both of the governance and assurance audits and the commission service providers. And what we have done is quite a bit of work on remobilisation and reconfiguration. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. Things are cutting out, being a bit weird. And what we have done is produce some remobilisation principles, which we'll share with Sandy and Gail. We're still working through to make sure that the response so far from clients has been that they're all perfectly sensible, but not everyone's sure that they can fulfil them. But we want to have that discussion and then hopefully do some work under AN421, which is helpful in terms of providing input into remobilisation in particular because of the link to strategy, redesign and everything else. And to a large extent, Angus should be in a very strong position because it's already done a lot of very good transformation work, probably more so than any IJB that I'm aware of. But that will be that part of the work, and the commission service providers will be a question of timing, because obviously we don't want to be too early because people are still dealing with COVID. We don't want to be too late and then miss the opportunity to have really good input at a time when services are being looked at again. So that's all I'd want to say on that paper. Okay,
thank you. Yes, I would support that around the commission service providers. Really important one to look out for. Anyone got any questions for Tony?
Yeah,
No.
I've got my hand up.
Sorry, Peter. I'm just trying to catch everything going on at the same time.
Yeah, I know. You need lots of eyes. It's just the coming back to the data quality. I remember from some time ago that we were having issues with knowing exactly how much was being spent on things like the Carers Act, and I'd like to ensure that we know how much money is coming in from the government to support the Carers Act and where that money is going and how that money is going. Talking to my IJB colleagues, there seems to be very little accurate information in other IJBs, and I would appreciate we having accurate information.
I'll discuss that one. So the data quality one is done and it's later on in the agenda, but I mean, it's a very specific audit. What I will do is if there's a way, and we'll be very clear this year that the plans are going to be subject to change necessarily because your risk profile's changing, or at least the understanding of the impact of COVID and therefore the impact on the risk profile is changing very much. So Sandy and I, when we discuss these audits, we'll have a discussion as to whether there's better work we can do, or whether in fact that's something that could come from a different route. But Sandy and I will discuss and make sure that that comes to you in some form or another.
Good. I realise it probably wasn't an audit item. It's just something that struck me as I was reading through the report. I thought, yeah, we need to flag that up.
Okay, thanks. Catherine's got her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. It was just, firstly, I guess, the substantive point that I was wanting to make about the appendix of page 18. The very last point there in the table, which relates to service providers, commission service providers, and it was just really flagging up that there's likely have been a significant change around the risks there and the potential mitigation as a result of COVID-19 and the rather unique circumstances Health and Social Care Partnership and others will find themselves in, both financially in relation to what's available to support providers, but also in terms of the other unintended consequences. So it was just really to flag that. The other thing was just so that I don't forget to mention it at another point where it's maybe more relevant, picking up the point that Peter just made. There's also a consultation which has just ended. I think the date for final responses was Sunday. And it was a Scottish Government consultation on changes to the local authority finance returns in relation to social work. And there's a proposal at the moment to significantly reduce the level of granular information that is sought from local authorities. So it may be, if folk have not had the opportunity to have a look at that, may wish to consider whether or not a late response to that consultation would be merited.
In terms of our work, I'm more than happy to pick up the timing and when the best time. It depends really on what sort of audit we want. And if there's one where it's more of a kind of a helpful audit, added value, then this might be a very good time, particularly in terms of some of the reconfiguration stuff. Or it may be that we're better off waiting until we fully understand the risks and you have a more considered kind of approach to the mitigation of them. But that's something that I'll discuss with Sandy and indeed yourself. I must say the Carers Act finance thing is completely beyond my comprehension. It's not something I've dealt with, and I'm not sure it's an audit issue in particular. But as you say, it's probably important that the audit committee is aware of that.
Okay, thanks for reading that, Peter, and Catherine, that's really helpful. Thanks very much. Gail's got her hand up now.
Yeah, in relation to Catherine's point there, Chair, we are feeding back into Angus Council's route map, because Catherine's quite right, the residential care home sector does remain fragile, and maintaining resistance to the pandemic is still resource intensive for us around professional assurance visits, PPE, testing regime, family visiting, Julie, but I'm not sure we need the additional audit, but just to say we are cited on that, Catherine, and contributing to the route map. There's a response going in today for that.
And these are national issues. Okay, so can we note that report and thank Tony for his contribution there, and move on to item 5, which is over to Sandy for the annual audit committee report.
Hi everybody, so this is a report that I think I probably shared with many of you earlier on as we were putting it together. It's going to the IJB this afternoon, so I'm hopeful it's just here as a fair record of what we've done in the last year, and it won't have any surprises for anybody. I'm happy to take any questions if there are.
Well, what I would like to say, and I did intend to say it at the start of the meeting, was how grateful I am for the level of work that has gone into all of this, the whole agenda, and the committee papers. It's an enormous depth and breadth of work under very challenging circumstances, and I just wanted to express my gratitude to Sandy and all the officers involved in that across the partnership, and ask that you reflect that back to your team, Sandy. Thanks for that. So can we go into that? Does anyone have any questions? I know I saw it early doors and was happy with it, but if anyone has any questions, now's your time. Gillian, got you.
Thanks very much, Chair. It was just more of a comment or observation, Chair, to say as your external auditor how much I welcome sight of this annual report that will be going to the full IJB in due course. I think this demonstrates very good governance, and the timing is all perfect with respect to the annual report and accounts. And as you've already observed, it captures a lot of the detail of the business that has been carried out throughout this year. And in many regards, and probably be saying it later, the year 1920 is like year zero. It's a really important foundation year for the years that are going to come ahead, which are going to be so very challenging. So we'd like to say thank you and to confirm that this is indeed good practice. So thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. Really appreciate that contribution, Gillian, and really glad you were able to hear that, Sandy. So can we note the report, please? Be happy with that? Excellent. Thank you. Now, bear with me until I get the right page. Item 6, which is again over to Sandy for the assurances received from our partners, which we've all received now.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Chair. So when we put together papers for the June committee, June Audit Committee, we indicated we would kind of share where we were in terms of our assurance process and governance process with people that we are working closely with, Angus Council, NHS Tayside, and the two other IJBs in Tayside who we share hosted services with. So we have, over the last few weeks, shared our assurances with them. And in the meantime, we've been receiving assurances back from them. Everybody's working to a slightly different timescale, but we have received assurances from NHS Tayside through sharing of their governance statement captured in this document. We received assurances from Angus Council. There are two primary assurances that we've always received. Angus Council have formalised just today the draft letter that you can see in the papers as one of the appendices. Since we wrote the paper, we've also received copies of Dundee IJB's governance statements and a letter of assurance from Perth and Cross IJB. I've shared them, all those papers as they've come in over the last couple of days with Rachel, who I thought was on the call, but seems to not be. Anyway, Rachel, she was, yeah. With Rachel over the last 2 or 3 days as they've come in. So hopefully, as far as both we as an audit committee, but in particular the external auditors are concerned, that does satisfactorily complete that action.
Good. And will those, the letters that we've received since we got the papers, will these be included or at least quoted in the minutes?
Yeah, they are quite lengthy now. I did at one point think we would be able to quote them in the minutes, so I could maybe quote them today, but they are now quite lengthy because we've had 3 in. So I think I maybe agree with, Rachel has received copies of these, and I perhaps hope that just doing that would perhaps be sufficient. Maybe Gillian could comment on that.
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to come in Rachel's absence at the moment. Rachel and I have already had a discussion, and Rachel is assured about all the formality of the assurances that you've received, both in the papers and subsequently. So as your external auditor, we are content with the material there. So thanks very much.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So any questions, anything subsequent for Sandy there? No, thank you very much. Can we note the content of those assurances then? Yes. Okay. Right, let's move on to item 7 and the audited annual accounts, and it's Sandy again.
Okay, well, thanks, Chair. I'll start this, but obviously at some point in the next, I don't know, minute or so, I will pass over to Gillian. What we've got here is obviously the final appendix here is our annual accounts, but there's feedback from our external auditors, and Gillian Rachel is now on the call. We'll comment in a second. The 2 comments I would maybe make are, one is there's not been too many changes to the accounts. We have had, I think it's mentioned in one of the reports, a couple of typing changes, and there was a small extra digit that somehow crept in one of the performance figures, and we've amended that in the final version. It's not amended, unfortunately, in this version here, but it was a small amendment to a figure regarding personal care activity, and we've had to remove a digit. That's just a factual correction. The other thing just to mention is that in terms of the final recommendation about approving the accounts, the Audit Committee has done that for a number of years. It's always considered, reviewed and approved. But just to remind ourselves that only in February of this year, through a paper that David took to the IJB, we did formally confirm that the Audit Committee would be the point in the place where we would approve our accounts. So we've done it for a number of years, but that was kind of confirmed in our kind of standing orders and kind of our remit. So that was just a helpful clarification that happened back in February. But I think probably best that I pass on to Gillian to go through the associated appendices.
Okay, thanks, Gillian.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Sandy. So the paper I'm looking at in front of me here, right at the top of it, it's Appendix 1 to report IJB 4320. This is essentially our cover letter addressed to the Audit Committee, dated the 26th of August 2020. So the cover letter just lets you know that the audit is now substantially complete and that we're complying with international standards of auditing, that there are no unadjusted misstatements to draw to your attention, and that we will be receiving a written representation from Sandy, a Section 95 officer, and that is very standard practice. Page 34 of your papers is our proposed wording for the Independent Auditors Report. And you'll be pleased to see in the top half of that page where we say report on the audit and opinion on financial statements. Further down, in my opinion, I say the accompanying financial statements give a true and fair view. And that's exactly the conclusion that the Audit Committee would wish to receive at the conclusion of the audit. You can see that the Independent Auditors Report has considerably more detail in connection with it with respect to the fundamental underlying principles for all of our audit work, and also with respect to the responsibility of Sandy as the Chief Finance Officer. So that's on page 35 of your papers. We elaborate further on my responsibilities and also all of the review that we do of the other information in the annual accounts. So myself, Rachel and team have to ensure that there's nothing in the narrative that it does not sit comfortably with the financial position as reported in the financial statements. So we're content with all of that, and we have those opinions later on. So it says report and other requirements, and these are opinions on matters prescribed by the Accounts Commission. So again, it's a satisfactory conclusion there about the content of the management commentary and the annual governance statement. And the earlier papers we had there about all of the cascade of assurances are really important in supporting the content in particular of the annual governance statement. And also, I have to say, if there's any exceptions, and I have no exceptions to report, and I think members of this committee know I have in the past had exceptions in other audits. So we're not glib or straightforward about all of these things. It's really very rigorous before we arrive even at these other aspects of the Independent Auditors Report. So I'm now turning to Appendix B, which is page 37 of your papers. Appendix B is the letter of representation, and this is the representation that Sandy will be giving on behalf of the organisation, also later today as the board moves to sign the accounts. And this is very standard practice to request all of these representations. So I'm not going to go through the detail of that, but perhaps importantly, I'm going to take you through some of the detail of Appendix 2. So that starts on page 40 of your papers, and in a very big font size, it reads Angus Integration Joint Board 2019-20 Annual Audit Report. So the first page again is an illustration of who we are and a reminder that because the IJB is configured as a local government body, it's the Accounts Commission for Scotland that appoints me as your external auditor. And I'm turning to the key messages which start on page 43 of your papers. Essentially, these are the key messages that I think are important for all of the board members to be aware of. This page captures everything at a high level at the conclusion of the audit. But for the purpose of today's audit committee meeting, I'm going to draw out some of the detail in the body of the report. So I'm turning to page 44, which is the introduction. This being year 4 of the audit, I think you'll be very familiar with the public sector audit model, which we capture here. And also paragraph 3 there, that's our first reference now to the fact that the global coronavirus pandemic has had significant implications for you as an organisation. We've also had to adapt the audit process, but I think we do all recognise the really big change is for 2021, and there was very little impact on the actual financial year at 1920. So perhaps I'll draw out at the bottom of page 45, paragraphs 12 onwards, Auditor Independence. This is really important that you're assured as to the independence of the team members that we've had working on this audit. And we do have processes in place that we carry out annually to be assured about that. I think that's really important because you may be reading quite a lot about the auditing profession in the business pages of the newspapers these past 2 years. So it's important that I draw out these aspects to you so that you have confidence. So part 1 of the accounts of my report starts on page 47, and essentially that's a reiteration of the main judgments that we have in the Independent Auditors Report. Something I think is important to mention to you August 26th today. This is the first IJB audit in my portfolio of 5 IJB audits that I am concluding. And as of this date, I'm still not in receipt of one set of draft accounts for another IJB. So Sandy and his team, and working closely with partners, did extraordinarily well to submit the draft accounts to that timescale. And also Sandy's giving you an idea at the very minimal changes that have happened between the draft and the final. So again, that is indicative of the quality of the draft accounts that were presented for audit. So we capture really those findings in the next page, paragraphs 21 and 22. Say there's nothing to report to you with respect to risks of material misstatement at the conclusion of our audit. And also paragraph 23, there are no significant findings that we also need to draw to your attention as a result of the audit. And at the foot of page 48, we're also saying that good progress has been made with respect to our prior year recommendations. Part 2 of the report talks about financial management and sustainability, and I think this is an area that both the Audit Committee and full board members will have been very engaged with in recent times. You've been closely monitoring the financial results for this year, and indeed you ended the year with a surplus, and you've been working closely with partners about what that means about returning some resources to one of the partners, and also working closely with the Scottish Government and just making a decision not to draw down certain resources during the year. But you can see our third main judgment there is all about the impact of COVID-19, the very significant impact, big implications for financial planning going forward. So turning to the body of this report, further detail about the results during the year. Exhibit 4 captures actual financial performance relative to budget, and we give assurances about the budget monitoring arrangements that you have in place, and also the fact that you have a medium-term financial plan, but you do need to work hard to identify how those savings will be realised going forward. And I have no doubt that Sandy and colleagues will be revisiting that constantly with the new demands being placed on all resources. And indeed, we capture that in paragraph 35 there. Standard reassurances about certain areas, paragraphs 37 onwards, about the systems of internal control and the arrangement and standards of conduct for the prevention and detection of fraud and error. So the next big section relates to part 3, governance, transparency and best value. And I think again you will find in this report assurances there about the governance arrangements that you have in place, and also with respect to best value and the monitoring of performance at all times to be assured about securing best value through the arrangements in place. We did take the opportunity, this is further on, I've lost the page number here, on page 54, we have elaborated further on a very important report that was issued during the year relating to mental health services in Tayside. Very important also for the 3 IJBs associated with NHS Tayside, and some of the changes there in terms of responsibility and the working forward to ensure improvement. And we note that the plan is that in February 2021, progress will be reported by Dr. David Strang, and I have no doubt you'll be monitoring improvements up until that date very closely. And we finish off with a reference to our national performance plans. So Appendix 1 captures actions, and this is an area I know Audit Committee members always take an interest in, and this is the point about ensuring there are detailed savings plans in place to support maintaining within the medium-term financial plan. And we also then go on to elaborate about how the prior year recommendations have progressed, some of them completed and some of them in progress due to the nature of them. Appendix 2 provides you with assurances about how we followed through on all of the risks we identified at the planning stage, and provides you with assurances there. And the final Appendix 3 relates to national performance reports, and in particular at the bottom, all those that are germane to the work of the IJB. So Chair, myself and Rachel will be happy to respond to any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And again, just a huge amount of gratitude to all our internal and external auditors for being able to deliver such an amount of work in very challenging circumstances remotely. So Tony, Rachel and Gillian, we really appreciate that. And I certainly found that report very comforting, actually. And it was a good read, really well laid out, easy to read and understand. And I completely endorse the remarks that you made, particularly around the mental health work that's going on. And it's certainly something that the IJB has discussed at length and is and cares deeply about. So thank you for that. Right, I've got a couple of hands up. I didn't see who was first. So I'm going to go for Andy first and then Peter, if that's all right.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Gillian for explaining that report so clearly and succinctly. So thanks very much for that. My question refers to Appendix 1, and it's maybe not an audit item issue or an audit report item issue, but there is mention of the financial sustainability of the IJB, specifically in the using up of the reserves in the next 3 years. Is that something that the Audit Committee should be concerned about and recommending any actions, or is that strictly an operational matter and the Audit Committee just kind of sits and watches this unfold before its eyes? Or is there any proactive things that the Audit Committee can do for something like that? That's my question.
So Chair, it's Gillian here. I'm happy to respond in the first instance, but also happy to pass over to key officers such as the Interim Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer. I think it's a known issue. I know that we're not breaking news in this regard. Over recent years, external audit has been encouraging the development of medium-term and also longer-term financial plans. Conscious that there was quite a short time horizon for quite a number of years. So we welcome, and in particular Angus IJB has been good about setting a medium-term financial plan. And through this way, you then find the gaps and then you then have to work about the service redesign or whatever to get the savings plans underway. There's no doubt that this is a massive thing that's come along with respect to COVID-19, and the financial sustainability of the system as a whole is really now in question. And this is where we're so pleased that the medium-term plans at least are in place to be the building blocks for what that means for the whole system. But I think what's important is that we're drawing it to your attention. I have no doubt that officers are very engaged in this, and I have no doubt through their reporting of their plans and intentions to the full board that full board members will be engaged in this going forward. And specifically for the Audit Committee, we have got a single recommendation that relates to this. So we will be coming back to the Audit Committee, and the Audit Committee will be wanting to see how officers are attending to it. So I would recommend that the Audit Committee stays engaged in it, but I know that the problem's bigger than it. So I hope that's a helpful response.
Thank you.
I see Tony's hands up. Is that in response to Andrew's question, Tony?
Certainly I had my hand up earlier, but I think in terms of that, there's a couple of bits in relation to that. One, as an audit committee, one of your key responsibilities is the consideration of controls over your most significant risks. Well, this is your most significant risk. So yes, it's very much a role for you, because if you're not making sure that this one's covered, then you're going to have a very upsetting problem coming along, and people are going to be asking you as an audit committee why you weren't on top of it. The solutions lie elsewhere, but as a committee, you need to have that awareness. And in some ways, I think it probably takes me on to, there's a few points over financial sustainability in there. And actually this does link to that remobilisation, reconfiguration, transformation agenda. It has to. So if we think about the fact that, you know, we already had a lot of pressure on services, Angus had done a particularly good job in responding to those, but services across health and social care were simply unsustainable. COVID has made things worse, but it's also provided an opportunity. And obviously it's been a terrible thing, it's had an awful impact on all sorts of people. But what it has done is meant that people who've been resistant to change or just haven't recognised the need for change or the possibility of change have all of a sudden in a very short period of time changed all sorts of things and are now wondering why on earth I didn't do it years ago. That is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that's why our audit plan, I was talking about remobilisation, reconfiguration, this, you know, they're not separate things. This financial sustainability is absolutely linked to service sustainability and to change. And in an organisation that doesn't have a lot of you know, committee structures and governance structures, it's probably no one else but you is going to keep an eye on that. But it also links to this issue of capacity and support. And that was something that came up at Dundee IJB full meeting because they couldn't have an audit committee yesterday. This idea that you need support from your partners to give you the capacity to actually implement that change. So all of these things fit together. It's certainly something we'll be looking at as your internal auditors and reporting back to you. It's also something as an audit committee I think you need to be on top of because it's all part of a continuum. Without that support, you won't have the ability to drive transformation. Without the transformation, you're not going to sort out the finances and you will also have service issues. So for me, all of those recommendations, although they cover different areas, are all part of the same thing. And obviously, as your auditors, we will be very much on top of that. So that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Tony. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. First of all, I think I say this every year, thanks to Gillian and the team, this report is a model of clarity, and I support what Julie said, that it's also a good read. So thanks again for that, and that's really good. It's already been flagged about the mental health issues, and this ties back into what Andy was saying, and it falls down into potential financial stability. Do we have confidence that any changes to the mental health systems in Angus are going to be cost neutral? That's the first thing. And if not, how do we flag that, and how do we quantify a risk if we think there is one?
So I think I'll hand that over to officers, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Coming in there, and Catherine has got her hand up as well.
Okay, let me reply to that. I think, Peter, maybe that was the first of maybe more than one point, but on that particular one, I think we will see that come through the mental health plan. So obviously, this paper's on the agenda today about the whole response to the original inquiry. But I think we will see developing financial plans for mental health coming through. And we haven't got sight of those. There's always been plans in the past, the financial plans, and sometimes the financial plans have worked and sometimes they haven't, but sometimes the service plans have worked and sometimes they haven't. So I think it's just going to be a case of us continuing to get updates about the mental health overall composite position, service, change, and finances coming through the board or whatever forum we agreed to receive them through. But I don't think we've really got that completely clear in our own minds yet. We'll just have to see how that develops. We have agreed we take regular mental health reports to the IJB.
But we're prepared to identify that as a risk and put it into a risk category as and when.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Second point is also about risk, and it's on page 69 in Appendix 3, and it's about Brexit. And it would appear that we're moving more and more towards a no deal, unfortunately. And I'm wondering whether all the good work that we've done on managing our prescription costs and drug costs is going to be brought low by potentially high imports of drug costs. And again, whether we should identify that as a risk, and if so, how.
Sandy.
Sorry, I'll take that one again. Yeah, I mean, we've obviously had a year where we haven't been seeking problems, but we've got a load on our table. The Brexit issues, yeah, the kind of issues that we would have spoken about a year, 2 years ago, I guess ultimately probably a lot of those risks still exist. The ones you're talking about, Peter, are in particular examples are things to do with supply chains for drugs. Probably asked, well, there will still be risks there, and they are still being looked at through pharmacy channels. And it is absolutely possible that some of those could have a financial impact on us, whether it's to do with things like exchange rate changes or just drug availability, or somehow impacts on the overall supply chains. But they haven't gone away. They are still there. They haven't, obviously other risks have been foremost in people's minds in terms of the responses, but we've got the Brexit risks listed there. And as I say, I think in prescribing circles, when we were looking at risks in the prescribing circles, we were flagging up the COVID risks, but the Brexit risk was still listed there in terms of its potential long-term impact during 2020 and 21 and beyond. So we have got our eye on that. We're just having to keep on monitoring it and do what we can to mitigate things.
Okay, fine.
Thanks for bringing that up, Peter. It was on my list as well to round off, because while we've been so immersed in COVID response, Brexit hasn't gone away. And it is a huge concern. Now, I've got Catherine, Tony and Gail, but I think Tony's taken his hand down. So, Catherine?
Just unless Gail wanted to come in on that last point rather than confusing matters. No, okay. Yeah, so again, we just echo the comments of others about the clarity of the report. In particular, I just wanted to draw your attention momentarily to page 58 and the outstanding issue of large hospital set aside. Thought it was particularly helpful that the report highlighted that Dundee had a little bit of movement there for this year's budget setting, and I think it would be quite helpful if there's any glimmer of us pushing for something similar to push quite hard on that, particularly as we know hospitals are not very full at the moment, and it's not the same for community-based services. So it would be quite helpful to see some of that money moving in the direction of supporting greater community activity in Angus. And I guess I'm concerned about the fact that we still haven't seen movement on that, even into 2020. And I'm concerned as well about the previous issue around mental health, just building on Peter's point, that when previously mental health services were being reconfigured, we were promised, I remember sitting at the IJB, a significant portion actually of funding would be moved to Angus to support with greater community provision. And my understanding is that promise wasn't fully upheld. And so I'm concerned really from our point of view that we're not at the moment maximising the income aspects to the extent that we perhaps might be able to going forward.
Thank you, Catherine. I was going to raise that exact issue this afternoon as well, because I remember sitting in a meeting in Nine Wells with the 3 IGB members and receiving that commitment that there would be a resource transfer to allow us to deliver community services that mitigated the inpatient bed scenario. So, as I said, Gillian, that remains a concern. And also the Mulberry, the Mulberry unit at Stracathro has required additional work that has not yet been funded. So that's also a concern. And actually it goes some way to explain, concerns around sort of trust in that relationship and how we move forward. But I'm hopeful that the mental health and wellbeing work will improve that situation. Right, Gail and Tony.
Sorry, in response to Catherine there, what I didn't want to speak about was the Brexit situation. I did want to speak about the earlier issue about mental health. I'm not as encouraged as Sandy, apologies Sandy, to think we would do this cost neutral for mental health. I, like Julie and Catherine, do envisage that we will require additional support. So thank you both for that, because you're absolutely correct. 96% of the work for mental health is in the community, and I'm not convinced we have the resource to do that. So I wholeheartedly support that. And Catherine, again, you're correct regarding the large hospital set aside. It's immensely frustrating, and I've raised it with Sandy as well. So thank you for bringing that point up too.
Okay, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. The first, just in terms of mental health, and something I wanted to pick up from the External Auditors report, and indeed the assurance letters earlier. You haven't had the assurance that you should have previously on mental health, acute mental health services from the IJB, but there is work being undertaken now that they should give you that. Doesn't answer the cost question, but at least you'll have assurances over quality. I am actually involved in some work for NHS Tayside on the mental health risk for assurance mapping. But I am aware that they've brought in someone from Lanarkshire to revise the whole mental health strategy, which will obviously need to link with the IJBs. And I do know the individual from the work in Lanarkshire. So there is a perfect opportunity to really get these points in terms of formulating a Tayside-wide mental health strategy, which obviously you as IJBs formulate strategy for overall mental health. So you will be a full part of that. The other point, my usual prophet of doom role, is to say that COVID will have a massive, personally speaking, I'm not an expert, but I can't see how the acute situation will get sorted without some kind of resource input. But in the community, which is to say 96% of the work, we know that COVID has had a massive impact, already having, and will be much more, a massive impact on demand. And this to a large extent feeds back to comments I made in my annual report about strategy. If your strategy is based on pre-existing levels of mental health demand and pre-existing costs, it's not going to work anymore. So there is that thing of saying, well, mental health is going to go up quite dramatically, therefore something else needs to give. And yes, some of that might be through large hospitals set aside, although I think the diminution, I mean, that needs to be sorted, but the diminution in numbers is only temporary. It's because people were scared to go into hospital. As we normalise, that will revert. Also, there's the fact that that money is only marginal cost. So the bulk of the cost is in staff you can't always get rid of and big units of equipment that don't change. So there isn't a massive amount going to flow through. All those things need sorting, but actually strategically, you will need to make some tough decisions about what you aren't going to do in order to fund increased mental health costs, would be my best. Auditors aren't supposed to guess, but that would be my best forecast, if you like. That mental health costs will rise both in acute and community.
And I think it's fair to say as well that this is recognised at a national level, that this is it was a pre-existing public health issue, but it's only exacerbated by COVID. And could I bring in a question here that could have come elsewhere, but I think it's probably pertinent to ask around the use of directions. And, you know, we'll see in papers this afternoon, in addition to the paper template around whether a direction is required. I understand historic reluctance to use it, and it's often been used as a last resort. And from our previous discussions, it's to be seen more as just how we do things. But I'm really interested to know, and I'm sure officers will have a feel for it, at what point in a process is a direction triggered, and how do we evidence the need for that? And I guess that's work that's still ongoing. But, you know, how are we going to use them to achieve a change in the system? Because large hospital set aside has been rumbling on for a very long time. And I know how pained we all were in Angus at the Mental Health and Learning Disabilities Review outcome. So could anyone help give us a steer on how that is progressing, and how we are going to get a sense of how that works following today's meeting, perhaps, how we use those directions? Gail, maybe, or Sandy?
Yes, Julia, David Thompson will be able to answer that. We went through a kind of test with that, I suppose, with the Abbey Health Centre situation by asking NHS Tayside to do that. In relation to the who instigates them, we've had some great discussion in preparing the papers for the IJB today around the issue of direction. So we've been very much guided by the legal team, but also through a recent conversation yesterday, the day before, Julie, with Christina Naismith from the Scottish Government around developing of the review of the integration schemes. So it's a question that not only are we asking as a health and social care partnership, but our other two partnerships in Tayside are asking. So David should be able to help with that this afternoon.
David's got his hand up just now.
Oh, is he here? I didn't know he was here. Sorry, I can only see 3 people on the screen. Can't see everybody.
David.
Chair, thank you. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that the use of directions is very much work in progress, and it's something that will develop over time. And I would like to think that that this time next year that the use of directions will be commonplace, and that we would all know where the directions fit into the sort of the relationship between the IJB and the Health Board and the Council. Where directions come into play, if you read the Scottish Government guidance about this issued earlier on this year, it's clear that the directions are the end point in a process, and that they should come as no surprise to anybody that there will be constant engagement with the IJB and its partner organisations in terms of developing new strategies and implementing new processes. So, as I say, we've started the process this afternoon, and I think we need to develop that. The issue you've raised about large hospital set aside, I mean, I appreciate that that's been an issue that's been ongoing for a very long time, and one can only hope that the issue is resolved. As I say, that there is a requirement for NHS Tayside to set aside sums of money to be available to the IJBs within its area. And one issue I would highlight as well is that the mental health review last year, that was actually coordinated and dealt with by Perth and Kinross IJB, who host that service locally, which may or may not be an issue that we would wish to discuss in the review of the integration scheme. So I hope that gives you some information. As I say, we're working through the process of the directions. I would strongly commend that the members of the committee actually read the statutory guidance, because it's very clear and straightforward. We've been in discussions with Christina Naismith, and we're hoping to have her up for a development session in September. And my hope is that will give both the audit committee and the members of the IJB an opportunity to just talk through the processes and procedures, because they are new to us, and they're new to the Health Board and to the Council. But one thing I would say is that the guidance is very clear, is that we should be recording the use of directions and monitoring their implementation as well. And that's part of the quality assurance process that needs to be undertaken between the IJB and the Health Board and the Council.
Thank you. Graham, are you watching your time?
Just a comment actually, and then I'll have to go. I sit on performance and resources. I also sit on the board, the NHS Tayside board, and at every meeting there is, I would say, a willingness to push resources out to the IJBs, and I'd be interested really to, because a lot of this comes down to contact, as it were, to to ask Sandy about his contact with Stuart Lyle and his team. I mean, what I'm saying is I think there is definitely a willingness, and it's talked about a lot, but does it go past talk?
Oh, shall I reply?
Yeah.
Well, for us, it hasn't really gone past talk so far. As you can see, you know, there has obviously been a reference to a change in Dundee. I think there are complications. There is detail behind why it's been put through that way. And you know, some of those details didn't quite apply to Angus, and then there are mitigating factors. For example, Angus would never have seen the scale of change that Dundee would have seen, because A, was smaller, and B, we maybe started off at a slightly different place, so we had less room for a change that would be of substance that would maybe trigger an adjustment. So we do have conversations directly with Stuart, but you know, for us they haven't translated directly into action, and but not into action so much as into you know, something that monetarily you would be able to see in a report. So, you know, I say we do have those conversations, but it's one thing to have a conversation; it's another thing to translate that into something that Stuart would then be able to put into one of his own financial plans.
Okay. Does that help?
I'd be happy.
It is, and I'll certainly deal with that message. And I will have to go though.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks for attending. Good luck. Tony has his hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. One, on large hospitals set aside, Sandy, as ever, has been very diplomatic. The national regulations are not well drafted. As ever with Scottish Government guidance, it's incredibly detailed till you get to the difficult bit, which is then left for local determination. And it is very tricky. And this is not a comment on Tayside, but if you think about the role of the Health Board, there is no particular motivation for the Health Board necessarily to want to engage with that, particularly in the moment when everyone's struggling financially. And that's not a comment around Tayside, because I know we've made the point in my other role about large hospitals set aside, but nationally, no one's really got to grips with it. And that's largely because it wasn't a particularly well thought through mechanism, I don't think, for transferring resources. It was a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and not a particularly well designed sledgehammer. The other aspect in terms of directions, there were two comments I'd make. One, very much echo the idea that direction should never be kind of the starting point. In a sense, you know, the role of an IJB is incredibly difficult, and it's about forming relationships. No matter what it says in that guidance, if you start using directions as a blunt instrument, that's not going to end well for anyone. It's just going to end up with a horrible mess. So, you know, in any negotiation, you know you've got directions up your sleeve, but in polite company, it'd be best not to mention that unless you really have to. So it's kind of there, everyone knows it's there, but you have the discussions and you try and reach a sensible agreement, and then the direction would be the end point and recorded, and particularly, as is mentioned, monitored. The one thing I would say about the national guidance is, by all means, read it. There are elements of that, in my view, are quite simply dangerous. Because what it says in there is, if you're the Chief Executive of a Health Board and you think the IJB is wanting to do something dangerous, you have no power to stop that, which I find astonishing. Same with the Council. And it says that the IJB's existing clinical and care governance arrangements should be sufficient to prevent you making a decision that is clinically unsafe. Well, they're not. We know that. We've discovered that in Perth and Kinross. We know that you don't always get the information from your other IJB partners. We also know that elsewhere, different parts of the same Scottish Government, sorry about that, different parts of the same Scottish Government have said, no, the clinical and care governance arrangements actually sit with the Health Board and Council. So it's not even consistent. So there are bits of that guidance that are frankly ill-founded. So please read them, and there's a lot of good stuff there, but just have that caveat in mind that actually the Chief Executive of the Health Board and indeed of the Council still have statutory legal responsibilities. They're the ones that go to jail. So they do have whatever it says in the guidance, they still have a legitimate role in looking after the safety of the patients. So I think there are the bits around what it boils down to is if sensible people have sensible grown-up conversations, and the directions are the end point of that. But with everyone in the room having the knowledge that if you really need to, you can go there and just go, sorry, this is where it's going to be. Then that's probably the best way forward. But not as a starting point or hitting people over the head with, well, do what we say, or we'll just whip out a direction. Sorry, I kind of went on a bit there and then the phone went off, but hopefully that's helpful.
I mean, that's why I asked about, you know, what are the triggers, and I would imagine they'd be different in each scenario, but that it's, I guess it's still when all else fails. But I'm pleased to see it in a more obvious way in the papers, and I guess one of the opportunities for discussion around directions will sit is at the board meeting, where those considerations by officers could be changed by the voting membership of that committee. And I think it would be good to have some of that development work covered with board members in due course. So that's really helpful, Tony. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else, or can we go to the recommendations on that paper? Are we all right with that? So the recommendations are: 1, consider and accept the external auditor's annual audit report for Angus IJB. 2, consider the annual accounts and then approve the audited annual accounts for signature by the Chair, Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer. And 3, request that updates regarding management actions are reported to the December 2020 Audit Committee. Everyone happy with those? Yes, lots of thumbs up, and thank you again, Gillian, for presenting that. That's been brilliant. Okay, can we move on? Sorry?
Sorry, Sandy here. Can I just make a quick comment?
Yeah.
Now that we've kind of agreed everything, first of all, I'd just also like to thank Rachel Emma, who I've worked with over a number of months on these accounts, and obviously Gillian for kind of presenting the summary of all that today. It's been difficult, and I'm really grateful that we all managed to kind of stick to the timetable, because I was reliant on our auditors feeding back very quickly at various times. So that was, you know, I think that's worked really well. I'm grateful for that. The other thing I'd just like to say, I know Lois is, looks like, well, assuming Lois is on the call today, Councillor Speed, and you know, Lois will be signing these accounts off at some point today. So again, I'm glad that Lois is, although she's not a member of the audit committee, I'm glad that she's been here today, just to be able to see the kind of a culmination of a process. I know Lois has been to 1 or 2 of our audit committees, but it's good that she's here today to be able to see the culmination, so that she can be obviously sign those, having, as I say, been party to the discussion today.
Good.
Thank you.
Likewise, glad you've been here, Lois. Thank you. Okay, can we move on to item 8, the internal audit report follow-up actions, please? And again, that's over to you, Sandy. You're on mute, that's it. All right, good.
Just sorry, I'm just going to quickly get myself forward. Oh, heck. Right, this is, sorry, I was just trying to catch up with where we were there. Yeah, so we at every audit committee, we bring back a follow-up report about where we are with our various internal audit actions. So this is that report. We have got a few things that have still been around for a while that we are still struggling with progress on. You can see that that flagged up here. Again, these are not new things, and it's sometimes consistent with things that you see in the action points at the very beginning of the meeting, and some things that you'll see in the governance actions further down. Having said that, 1 or 2 things have moved on. 1 or 2 things regarding prescribing have moved on, and we relatively recently considered the risk management report that went to the IJB Audit Committee in June, and we have started to look to get a an action plan for that together, and that will be taken through the Clinical Care and Professional Governance Forum. So that's where we are, and unless people have any questions, I hope that report is relatively self-explanatory.
Okay, any questions, anyone? I guess from my point of view, it'd be good to see some movement on the top 2 items. So maybe by next report, it would be good to see some shift there. And I do appreciate the circumstances that we've got. So like you, let me ditter back to the start. We're asked to note the report and the progress made to date. We're all happy to do that? Yep. Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands up, so let's move on. Item 9, it's a governance action plan. And that again is over to Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. So in a similar vein to the last report, this is capturing governance issues that have been flagged up in various reports, and in due course, feedback from, for example, the external auditors report that we've just seen would start to appear in a report such as this, so we can monitor progress against that. Again, as with the last report, we have got some historic actions that we have frankly got bogged down with over time, again due to complexity and often due to interactions with other parties. And one of the things that we have said as an aside to this report is that we would flag up significant governance issues to our main IJB board. And that's evident in a finance report that goes to this afternoon's meetings, where we're picking out the salient governance kind of shortcomings. So that's just so everybody can clock that and be conscious of that when you see that this afternoon in the finance report. But I think most of the issues captured here are things that we've seen before. Some of them, as I say, are a bit stuck, and you're working with Gail and others. We hope we can kind of make progress on some of them going forward. But happy to take any questions.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Sandy on that action plan? I think we've covered the large hospital set aside for today. Okay, right, thank you. Let me just scoot back to the beginning. Okay, so we're asked to note the attached action plan and request that the action plan submitted to all future meetings of this audit committee. So everyone happy with that? Okay. Moving on to item 10, which is the external reports. And I have hands up, I haven't yet finished the supply and demand for medicines report, but it looks very interesting. So I will be finishing it in due course. And I was really pleased to see Scott Jameson, our own Scott Jameson, quoted in the early parts of that. So it'll be good to hear a kind of local follow on from that. I'm really quite keen to hear. Does anyone have any questions on those reports or any comment that they'd like to add? No. If you haven't read that report, I think it is going to be quite a good read, so I would encourage you to do so. And again, thanks for that, Sandy. Okay, we're just asked to note the publication of those reports and move on to item 11, which is the annual internal audit plan. And Sandy again. Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks, Chair. So Tony can pick this up in a second in terms of any comments he wants to add. But I think the main points in this are we need to, as we mentioned at the start of the meeting, we need to recognise that we need more flexibility in the plan this year than we normally would have, and be slightly less prescriptive at the outset. I think that's kind of recognised in this plan. We flagged up, again, noted here, the fact that we're going to look at commissioned service provider risk this year. It's an important part of how we manage our services sustainably. As Catherine mentioned earlier on, that has been a very dynamic area in itself. And as Tony touched on, we've just got to make sure we pitch what we're trying to do at the right level and do it at the right time, because there's different kind of takes on that audit. But I think it's an important thing for us. We have 40 odd million pounds of activity commissioned through providers, and we'll just have to make sure we can do that audit as productively as possible. And just the last point to note in section 2.1 is that we would hope to have all the reports back by April, so that we can kind of dovetail that in with the final internal audit report coming through to the June 2021 audit committee.
Okay.
Tony, do you want to add anything?
Nothing particularly to add to that. I think you've covered it very well. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay. Catherine's got her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a question really about the governance and assurance aspect, so 8N04-21. And I'm just wondering, in among that, which has quite a broad range of activity, is there a role around supporting the Health and Social Care Partnership Management team consider the workforce optimisation? I see we referenced that in an earlier report as activity that's ongoing, but I'm just conscious that we probably do want to have some sort of assurance around the succession planning arrangements, for example, because I'm aware anecdotally of a number of potential moves over the next year or two that could potentially leave the management structure quite vulnerable. I can see Gail put her thumb up.
Okay, that actually came up briefly in the Council's Scrutiny and Audit Committee yesterday around how aware are councillors of succession planning. So that's a really helpful contribution.
To a large, sorry, to a large extent, that audit it's deliberately a bucket of days for whatever the organisation needs, subject to what the audit committee also considers appropriate, and definitely workforce optimisation in two ways would be appropriate. In terms of the management structure, you've got a massive set of tasks ahead and not that many folk, so absolutely both the NHS and local authorities are not startlingly great at contingency planning. But also we did a workforce audit not that long ago that picked up a few issues that really do need to be looked at, because, as we've said, COVID is going to hit the oldest people are at the highest risk. They're most likely to give up, bluntly. And we've also got a lot of young people who previously maybe wouldn't have come into health or social care, who will, because whatever career they had in mind is now disappeared. So there are logical things. There are two kind of separate things there. There's the management structure of the IJB itself, which is very lean and can't afford to get any leaner, plus has additional duties. So we'd happily look at that and help in a kind of more proactive way. And there's also that thing of how the IJB and its strategic planning takes into account the workforce issues in formulating its strategies, and ensures that the partners who have to deliver those strategies are doing the things they should do in terms of workforce. And our reports are public. We've certainly said in terms of one of the partners that isn't the case, that they don't have a recruitment and retention strategy they should have, etc. So yeah, that's something we'd happily pick up, and I think it's a key risk. The biggest thing we'd say is that those need to be focused around your biggest risks, and workforce is decidedly one of your biggest risks, so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And there's that, the loss of institutional knowledge that is often really, really hard to quantify, but comes within that. Gail, would you like to come in?
Yeah, Catherine's right again, as is Tony. We're extremely lean, and a number of the workforce can in fact leave, and as you know, particularly if managers are nurses, they can leave from the age of 55, which the majority of our senior team are. The workforce plan is on the agenda for the IJB this afternoon, so perhaps these are valid questions for people to raise there. As well, and I'm just off a meeting this morning actually that's looking at extending the bank of staff from just not only nursing but wider than that, because we really need additional resource to go into the bank of Tayside to ensure we get the right workforce at the right time, in the right place because of COVID, winter planning and all the shortages. And you're absolutely right, Tony, I don't think we've got that as secure as we need to. So all points, I agree with all points there. That's very good actually. Thank you, very helpful.
Okay, anyone else have any more? No, we okay with that? Thank
you. Sorry,
Oh.
Chair. Catherine's point, Catherine, around that page 107, the 0421, were you suggesting an additional point there? Around the governance and assurance line?
I mean, an additional point might be helpful, although I did notice that it said, for example.
Yes,
so I wasn't sure whether or not, you know, it was flexible enough just to include it, but I really did feel that it's probably something that the audit committee would quite like to be cited on. The
I think we should strengthen that.
And,
Flexible deployment means basically whatever we can do to help. Just one thing about the workforce strategy, and I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to look at the papers and probably won't do, but one of the things with the workforce strategy that might be an interesting question is who's going to monitor it? Because you rely on your partners. I don't think they monitor it particularly effectively. So, you know, that might be a useful question. Although don't quote me, please, because I think, okay, so I'm in enough bother as it is, so fine, go on.
I will wait to see who takes that question.
Well, there'll be lots of eye contact around the table, I'm sure, at that point. Okay, thank you. Oh, Sandy's got his hand up there.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think, can we agree we don't change what's in front of us, but through the minute of today, we do recognise that perhaps some of that resource wrapped up in that, you know, that audit is used to consider where we got to with the where the workforce plan is. I think that would probably just do all those jobs.
Okay, that would be great. So in that case, are we all happy to approve the recommendations? So approve the internal audit plan and request that the internal auditors proceed with the implementation thereof. Are we all happy with that? Good, thanks very much. Okay, and now we move on to item 12, which is the data quality internal audit plan, report rather. Okay, Sandy, are you kicking off in that yet?
Yep, thanks. And I'll also pass on to Tony if Tony wants to add any comments. Yeah, so this was part of our 2019-20 plan, as you saw from an agenda item way back at just after 12 o'clock. The audit has kind of reached its conclusion that we've got this report here. We are still just reviewing the final bits and pieces of it, and that review is just taking a fraction longer than it normally would, partly because it's a slightly more technical audit than many we have, and we've had to kind of just agree various things with people that we're not normally in contact with, and that's just a bit harder than normal. But otherwise, it reads as a relatively positive report. It's got one or two actions that we've obviously built in management responses to. So hopefully the board would feel, unless Tony says otherwise when he comments on it, that they feel they can kind of agree it as it stands, but also note that we've just got to agree some final tweaks with Tony's team. And if there are any material changes, we would bring that back to a future IJB board, audit committee.
Okay, Tony.
Nothing particularly to add to that, Sharon. It is a very technical audit, very specifically about the Eclipse system. Probably the one thing I would highlight is that broader point around making sure that all of these things facilitate integration. And there is something very important. It comes back to this idea of resources provided by partners. You know, the eHealth team, or sorry, the IT teams in both partners are very stretched. Obviously, COVID's made that particularly significant, and it's making sure that the IJB has its place, and certainly combined, the IJBs have their place in terms of making sure that the eHealth strategy, sorry, the IT strategies of both partners give sufficient place to the IJB strategies, and particularly integration. And to be fair to, for example, the NHS Tayside team, they've got to integrate with 3 partners. So it does, you know, it's difficult. And I know that there is a group that looks at these things and does involve, make sure it involves people from the IJBs. That's probably the biggest thing. It's a means to an end. It's about doing everything we can to make sure that integration is seamless, that it's efficient, that it's used as an enabler to transform services. So this is a microcosm of that. There's a lot of technical stuff which I don't really want to take you through, not least because it was done by the Angus Council team, so I'm not sure I would know too much on the technicalities. But it is an overall positive report. a number of wee things to build on, but there's a broader theme there about making sure we use IT to its fullest extent, because we need to transform services. And that's all I'd say.
Okay, thank you. And I think the last 5 months have shown just how vital it is to have it working. I think it would be good for us to have the final report, regardless of whether there's any material change or not, if that's all right, if that could just be sent out. Now I've got Peter and then Catherine got their hands up.
Yeah, it's, where are we? It's on page 120 and it's point 40, where it says that currently there's no connection between Care First and the NHS IT system. And this comes back to Tony's point. We're now moving to Eclipse, and I would like to see specifically that somewhere in this report, it either says that Eclipse will talk to NHS IT or it won't. And if it won't, what's the point of doing it?
Could I just, in 1997, I remember writing a press release promoting the much vaunted single shared assessment. Angus NHS Trust and local authorities, and we're still waiting. Catherine.
Hi. So I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for the implementation of the Eclipse programme. Eclipse is an update to Care First, so it's not a new system. It's simply migrating us to the latest version of an IT system that we already use. And it's important that we keep up, because Care First will stop being supported. So it's very important that we update the system. However, I think this wider issue about integration of systems probably does need to reflect that we're not talking about one system for social work and social care, which is Eclipse, and is used by other aspects of social work and social care in the council, which it's also really important that there's an interface and an integration with, but also that we're not talking about it linking with one NHS system. The NHS does not have one IT system. It has a myriad of different IT systems. And I know that there are massive problems with interfacing technically with those different systems, not just in relation to day-to-day case management activity, but in relation to even simple things like flagging, for example, multi-agency child protection notifications. So some systems that have previously worked have been then disabled as a result of NHS Tayside's upgrade of systems. So this is a perpetual issue. The challenge is actually one which is fairly fundamental, and it's about data protection and the ownership of data. So at the moment, because the Health and Social Care Partnership is constituted of two separate legal entities, and David will, I'm sure, come in at some point if I start talking dosh, but it's the council owns the social work data and the NHS own the NHS data. And so they have to make sure they've got robust systems in place, and the governance of that from a data protection point of view needs to be within the single agency, not within the Health and Social Care Partnership, which is not a constituted body. And so that's the fundamental challenge. And I think that we're going to perpetually see this issue causing difficulty, and it does cause difficulty in terms of direct practice provision, because we've got social workers and support workers working alongside nursing staff who are NHS employees who can't input into one single record in relation to one human being that they're both working with on the same care plan. And so whilst I understand that, you know, from the outside looking in, it looks like nonsense, there are very clear organisational and legal reasons why it's necessary, and it's not as straightforward as just joining one to the other. There are lots of unintended consequences that would come from doing that in the way that we would need to do it at the moment. But I absolutely support the principle, and just to say that these points, including access to digital equipment, so laptops, mobiles, etc., for Health and Social Care Partnership staff, have both been flagged in the Chief Social Work Officer's annual report, which is due to be laid before the Council on the 10th of September, she says. Fingers crossed, it's just gone as a draft today. So we are flagging these issues, but they are much more complex than they look on the face of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've spent my career in IT, Catherine, so I fully understand the issues of integration, which is why I flagged this one. I think, therefore, at point 40, it would be worthwhile identifying that there are issues in linking, that Eclipse is not the panacea that some people may assume it to be, and that we should actually say that it will not necessarily resolve all the integration issues that we have.
No, it certainly won't do that. It'll offer other potential options into the future, but it certainly won't solve it in and of itself.
Yeah.
Tony, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, if I can, I mean, absolutely echo those points, very important points. And in some ways, a technical audit, we've kind of put something in as an aside, which has raised a load of questions. So it's a good point, but in that context, it's maybe not the right place. I'll have a look at thinking about how we might make sure that that's much clearer. There is a difficulty, particularly for the NHS systems, in that a lot of them are prescribed nationally. And at that point, they're certainly not thinking about how they might integrate with 42 local authority systems. Sometimes you're lucky if they work at all, but fine. You know, there are difficulties that way. The only good bit of news is, and I can't remember where I saw it now, but there was something that came out nationally. There was a piece of guidance that said, yes, we recognise that there are different legal entities and we have to be careful with data protection, but you know, the important thing is the health and well-being of the people that we're trying to serve. And that must also be taken into account. I'll see, unfortunately at my age, I can't remember a thing anymore, but I do have staff that luckily can remember stuff. So if I find that guidance, I will share it through Sandy with the committee, because it does give a glimmer of hope that whilst we still have to be very careful around these things, we might have a bit more leeway than we had or thought we had previously. So I'll share that if I can find it.
I think maybe it's an issue that needs to be resolved at a higher level than Angus.
Oh, yeah.
For precisely the reason that Tony raises, that it is about seamless patient care and making sure that no one falls between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, just to finally add on to, my involvement with the NHS in England was working with a company that was providing connections, and we were one of the companies that were theoretically providing the spine of linking every NHS system in England, GP surgeries to radiology to hospitals, and that failed after something like 40 million quid.
I have a similar sorry tale from my NHS days. I'm not even going there. So could I, thanks for all of that. Could I just take us back to the recommendations that were being asked to note the internal audit review of data quality, agree to the associated draft management response and actions and ask for an update. And thirdly, I've already asked that I would like the final version anyway. Just so that we know that's the final version, and there's even tiny changes. We've got the up-to-date version. That would be great. Thank you very much. And item 13, the annual review, that's to be shared with us when it is ready, reported to the next audit committee. I'm happy with that. And the date of the next meeting, item 14, is Wednesday the 9th of December at 12 noon. And again, just point, oh, Sandy, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish that sentence, Julie.
Well, it's okay, just caught your hand up there rather than your blue hand. Yeah, just a reminder that next year's audit committee meetings start earlier. Was that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Superb, it's like we rehearsed this. 11:30, which had me panicking about today, but just please remember that next year's timetable of meetings will be starting at 11:30. And on that note, thank you everyone for your contributions today and your presence, and we'll see you in 25 minutes.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. See everybody.